let's jump into calls.
Okay, who are we talking to first?
All right, let's talk to Ian in the UK. Ian is asking about skepticism and whether or not we should apply that to things like who built the pyramids. Ian, welcome to the show.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
So I am so pleased to be the first caller on the first show of your second series.
Beautiful.
I've sort of gravitated towards your show recently. I really like the style, I like the way that you complement each other. Please, Eric, don't take this the wrong way. I think I relate to V's style a little bit more than I do yours.
That's totally okay. You know, what's funny is we get feedback from people who say that, oh, well, I really don't like Eric's this or that, his tone of voice or whatever. I just want you to find those people that you resonate with, that you feel like you can build a community with, that are beneficial to you. I do not need to be that person. I just want you to find that person.
And it's me. Hi, Ian. Okay, so let's dive in. You are calling about something interesting, which is the construction of the pyramids. I'm really curious.
It is, but let me just take a step back from that. I really want to say about when is it reasonable to be skeptical about scientific consensus. I know we've seen a lot of this last year with people being skeptical. Well, they say they're skeptical, but they're dismissive of science, and yet they're not applying real skepticism to the process or to what they believe. So if we take so we will talk about the pyramids, but back in late 60s, early 70s, and I apologise, that's a long time ago, I was given the book to read for Christmas, which I think was called Chariots of the Gods by Tor Eidal. The premise of that book was that the construction of things like the pyramids and other things like in Peru and various other places was not possible by the technology that we attribute to the people at that time.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, he went a bit far, and he started saying, "Oh, it was because of aliens came down and things like that." So that's going too far.
Okay.
But the basic premise, I think, is reasonable. I think it is reasonable to be sceptical about what we're told about, specifically about the pyramids, also about the Peruvian megastructures. I've been to Peru. I've seen some of these firsthand, and they are absolutely amazing if you ever get the chance to see them.
I mean, it's definitely on a bucket list. But I'm curious why, like, what about the pyramids, what about these structures specifically are intriguing to you and make you want to ask this question?
I think there are many points I could raise. Let me take what's possibly the best one, I think. So there were a number of pyramids built over a short period of time, and I think there are about 5 pyramids, including the main pyramid. And I think if you look at the scientific consensus, it was over about 80 years, I believe. I may be wrong on that. I need to just check up all the figures. But one of the pyramids that was built, I can't remember the name of the pharaoh they attributed to, but he built 3 pyramids. He built the Step Pyramid, which is characterized by, it goes up at quite a steep angle and then it sort of levels out a bit. Now, when they excavated that pyramid, there were a lot of passages underneath in which they found many tens of thousands, I think the latest figure is about 40,000 stone vases. Okay. Now, these vases were made out of very hard rock, granite and things, and even carborundum, which actually is only one level down from being as hard as diamond. Okay. And yet these were built. I've been to the British Museum in London and seen these, and they attribute them to this period of when I think it was 2,600 or 2,500 years ago. 2,500 BC. And alongside them, they show the tools that they purport were used to construct them. And these tools are basically copper chisels and stone mallets.
Okay. So I'm following, and I want to make sure we're moving this along. I have some questions just around. I think there are questions to me about it's reasonable to look at a commonly understood historical story and look at it and be like, okay, maybe this happened in a different way. Maybe this is more mythology than actual history, right? All of these historical stories that we have do pass through many, many different interpretations, and the way that people back then wrote history was infused with mythology. So, like, on that level, I absolutely agree that we should be able to question these things. My question is saying, okay, well, maybe they had technology we didn't know about, or maybe another country that did have that technology helped them. Those are all reasonable assumptions to make, but usually when people talk about the pyramids and how it's impossible for the people who lived there to build them, they kind of go to the whole, like, alien thing, and I just want to get there if that's where we're going, or if we're not going there, I want to know so I'm not thinking that you're going to come out here with aliens. We're
not going there.
Okay, we're not going there. That's good.
No way, no. So what I'm saying really is that there's evidence to say that they could not have done this. I'm not trying to say or inject anything in there by saying who it was that did them, just that the story was being given by the archaeologists and the anthropologists, I don't think can be correct.
Okay.
So I may I, because I know that you guys were talking, but I'd like to.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Hey, Ian. Hey, so I was actually thinking about this the other day, so I'm really excited that you called. First off, is it that unbelievable that people did it? You started this conversation by saying it was impossible. How do you know that it's impossible? Because that is actually a pretty intense claim.
All right. I accept impossible as being 100% about something. Sure. Saying that they could not have done that.
No worries. Are you aware that archaeologists and engineers have, through intense investigation, discovered how they were put together?
I know they claim they do.
Okay.
I've seen, for example, there's evidence of machining on some of the blocks around the pyramid. And these are hard stone, granite stone, for example. There are evidence of what look like saw marks. There's evidence of what look like boreholes. Now, I know there have been some scientists who have said, right, we can do this with a copper tube and ground, and we can stand here and we can rotate this and produce the same or similar effects that they can that we've seen.
So I guess, first off, so you're not talking about the height of the pyramid. You're not talking about...
No. You're
just talking about the shape of the stones.
I'm saying about the materials largely.
Okay, so...
There are, for example, huge granite blocks.
Yeah.
And they are finished to a high level of accuracy.
Right. And
in terms of flatness, in terms of mirror finish and so on.
Right. So I guess the question then is, are you just as skeptical of Greek and Roman buildings as well? Huge, like, think about the technology that they had then versus Greece and Rome, right? I mean, nobody's looking at the Parthenon and going, oh, that people could not have done that. What was different? Because
I'm not sure they are looking at that.
I just, the other one I want to bring up is, what tools were available to the sculptors who made some of the most beautiful marble and stone, statues that we've seen. Now we know they were made by people. We've seen it. We have artisans who can still do it. And so the idea that it's impossible is interesting to me. And just so you know, people who are watching, we are hoping the clipping will go away. This kind of thing happens when the streaming software and YouTube, when there's something going on. We've done everything on our end, and we're hoping that it's going to adjust. Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
So I'm not aware there's any sound issues.
Yeah.
So taking your point, there are so look at the statue of David, for example, which is made in marble, and it's really a fantastic piece of work. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was done more recently than we're talking about here. Marble is a softer stone than things like granite and some of the stone that they're using on the pyramids.
Okay.
The issue I have is if you look at some of the stones on the inner chambers of the pyramid. Take the Great Pyramid, for example. There are massive granite stones on there. Yeah. Now, talking about those, I can't remember offhand what the weight of these things are, but they're massive. They're very closely knit together. They're very closely finished. And yet we are told by the archaeologists, they made these using copper tools and I think they call andesite. I might be wrong.
Okay. Can I jump in here real fast? I'm sorry, Ian. I know that you've got more points to make. I'm less interested, and we have to kind of keep this moving along. I'm less interested in the actual specifics of this argument, and I'm more interested in why you're making this argument in the first place, because I know that there are people who are skeptics about all things just because that's the way that their minds work and that's how they like to view the world. I do take a more pragmatic approach, I think, in terms of why am I being skeptical about this? Why am I spending my time, my finite amount of time, asking this particular question about this thing? And my question for you is, even if we were to grant that things don't seem to line up, which I can't because I haven't done that research, I can't weigh in on that, what value is it to you to be skeptical about who built the pyramids?
I think it's important that we don't dismiss what might be seen as fringe theories because they don't happen to match the scientific consensus. Let me give you.
That's a wonderful direction.
Yeah.
So Ian, the statement that you just made, is it acceptable to accept a fringe theory because you don't think that there's enough evidence elsewhere? What is it about it? Because if someone gives me a fringe theory, I'm going to look for evidence for the fringe theory. If I ask about something and they tell me, oh, well, I don't like what the other side has to give, that does not provide evidence for a fringe theory. And so when you point at this and say, well, you don't accept the reasoning that professionals have given to give their best estimate of how it was made, that doesn't actually provide support for anything else other than you just being skeptical of that one claim. And so if your question is, should we be giving fringe theories time? It depends on how much evidence there is for those fringe theories. And if there's not evidence for them, then no.
Right. The lack of evidence in one direction does not constitute positive evidence in another direction. So the difference between being skeptical about consensus, which is what you're calling it about, and accepting fringe theories, which is also what you're calling it about, the difference between those two things is one of them is saying, I don't see enough evidence for this claim that you are making. In fact, some things that I've done research on seem to contradict it. So I'm going to keep looking for answers, or I'm just going to reserve judgment if that's not where I want to put my time and energy. Accepting a fringe theory is an entirely different set of criteria, right? Because you then go on to say this scientific consensus is not accurate. Therefore, this other thing must have happened. And this other thing, the problem with a lot of them, not all of them, but with a lot of those fringe theories, is that they are actually less believable than other alternatives, right? The options are not, as you know, either the pyramids were constructed exactly the way we think they are, or aliens did it. Right? There's a plethora of options in there. And so in order to be convinced by a fringe theory, what the person presenting it would have to do is actually convince me that it is the only other option and more likely than the one that has the consensus. Yeah. Right? So yeah, that's kind of the difference between the two. I'm curious what you think.
There's a lot there, V. Let me try and unpick that a little bit.
Yeah.
The last one you said, which is, try to prove that there is evidence for this fringe theory, I think was the way you I can't remember exactly how you stated it. Let me give an example from more recently. I'm talking about the 1980s. You may or may... I won't say that. Basically, there was consensus... There was some study done by 2 Australian doctors in the late 80s, I think. No, the early 80s. Which basically they believe that stomach ulcers were caused by bacteria. And they could not get any of the rest of the medical profession to believe them. They were treated as if they were a fringe theory.
Right.
What one of the doctors did, because they couldn't get agreement to do human trials,
right,
he infected himself with the bacteria that they found in many of these patients who had stomach ulcers, with the bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. And very quickly, he developed ulcers. They then found that by taking antibiotics, the stomach ulcers cleared up. But it was very much a fringe theory. It took the medical profession probably about 12 years before they actually acknowledged this.
Right, right. And that would be a really good example of somebody actually proving that fringe theory to be the case, right? And even if it takes a while to catch on, if that proof is there, if that evidence is there and available, then eventually, I hope, we will move towards that as a society. But that's not necessarily my concern here. My concern is that is a really good example of when a fringe theory turned out to be correct because there was documented evidence of it being correct.
Can I just throw something in here really quick for linguistic purposes? I would say that a hypothesis that needs to be tested is a hypothesis until it is proven or disproven. If it is proven to be true, then you can take that hypothesis and say, here's our working understanding. If you take that hypothesis and you are either unable to test it, or you have, reasoned your way out of accepting the reality that it was proven false, then you have a fringe theory. So your example is a hypothesis. It took the mainstream longer to accept it, but to call it a fringe theory, I want to break that difference, because there are fringe theories that have been tested or are untestable,
right? And
people still hold on to them, and so I don't want to conflate those.
Right. That's a good clarification. Fringe theory does feel kind of like loaded as a loaded term. If we talk about this in terms of hypotheses, that's how science progresses, right? That's how our understanding of the world progresses. We listen to people's hypotheses, and then we test them. And if they fail those tests, then we discard them. Or if they are not testable, then we ignore them until they can be tested. So I'm intrigued and confused by your examples, because it feels like you're trying to lead us down a path to your ultimate point. And I really, really just want to know what that point is. Like, why, what is this connection between the pyramids and ulcers for you that are, I feel like we've got the bedrock of your point, but we haven't gotten to why you're making this argument.
I think that you're right. It's probably not right to call it fringe theory. I will get to the point, but let me just say that it's quite often we have a theory. So, for example, we had Newton's theory of gravity that worked largely. We found it didn't work in certain cases. And that led us to believe that there was more to it than we knew, and that eventually led to Einstein's theory. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that we can have a scientific consensus, and things can be pointed out that are wrong with it,
right?
Without actually saying what the theory. There's no theory or no hypothesis being made at that stage. We're just pointing out there is something wrong with what we're being told and what the general consensus is, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I'm saying there's something wrong with the story, the scientific consensus that says that the pyramids were made by the first dynastic Egyptians. I've been to Peru and I've seen some of the things there, and then there's, I don't believe, frankly, that they were built by the people who they're being attributed to. So I'm pointing out errors in the current scientific consensus. And this is why I'm phoning in really to say, look, is it reasonable to be skeptical about these things by pointing out the things that are wrong with it? No. I'm not going to go down to say aliens did or fringe theories. I'm saying, but there might be another explanation that we need to try and investigate. But it seems like the scientific consensus is shutting down any discussion along those ways.
You know
Maybe
what? I think we're getting closer to this point, and we are going to have to wrap this call up. But Ian, I think that the piece here that we're missing is, yes, there are definitely going to be times where the scientific community shuts down a line of inquiry because the people who are making those decisions and those claims are not qualified. So the other component here that we need to be thinking about when proposing alternate explanations or calling into question the validity of a thing is it more likely that everybody is wrong, which could be the case, or that I don't know as much as people who are experts in this field, right? And so we're seeing this a lot with what's going on now with the plague that is happening, right? We've got people who are not scientists, who are not epidemiologists, who are not doctors, saying, well, this doesn't add up because what about this thing? And the reason that a lot of that gets shut down is not because we don't want to admit that there's a mistake, although that could be the case sometimes. I'm not saying that's impossible. The reason it's being shut down is because the people who know what they're talking about know that's not actually an issue, and paying attention to it is only going to do more harm than good. So okay. I think the other component that we need to talk about here next time, if you would like to call back, is, do we have the knowledge ourselves to decide when something doesn't add up?
Can I just quickly address that? I agree with what you're saying, and I see that has happened. However, I would say that archaeologists are not engineers. Archaeologists look at the stones being how they've been produced, and they have their theories, but they don't test them properly. And yet, if you take, and engineers have actually looked at these things, artists who carve stone for a living have looked at these things and said, this is not possible with the tools that they are supposed to have used.
Maybe we're looking at different documentaries, because I study a lot of archaeology with my day job. I'm not an archaeologist, but I do a lot of research on archaeologists, and the idea that they don't bring in experts makes zero sense to me, because that's what I see in that, that kind of stuff being used in the field. People sticking to their lane is really damn important, but also experts have looked and come to the opposite conclusion. They've gone, okay, this is how we believe it was done. But
also, I do want to point out that you're right, that archaeology is not science in the way that we talk about it when we talk about things like medicine or biology. So but the problem here is that you brought archaeology as an example and then broaden that to scientific consensus, right? So we're both in this space of equivocating with that, and I agree that that's probably a thing we should tease out a little bit more to be more accurate. But I think we need to wrap this call up, Ian. We do have a lot of callers on the line.
Holy crap, it's been over a half hour, yeah.
All right.
What I'll do is, I think you're on Discord afterwards, is that right?
We are on Discord afterwards.
We're going to do an after show.
I can certainly put some of the links to various places I've looked at.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, and
scientific papers and so on afterwards. I can do that.
And check out Holy Kool-Aid. He's put out a lot, and I've helped.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Were you questioning whether or not archaeology is science? I don't know whether it is or not.
That's another conversation. Thanks so much for calling in, Ian.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. This conflation of scientific consensus and science. Practicing good science is trying your best to disprove whatever's going on because you want to know if something is wrong. And if you want to see science at work, you find people who go, hey, what if it could be X or Y or Z, and they test for it. Somebody in the comments says, science does not actually prove things. Not always, but it can predict. And so if you are looking for a likely, if you're looking to find evidence for a hypothesis, if that hypothesis has predictive power and you check it out and it works, that is definitely evidence in favor of the hypothesis that you're putting forward. And so when I say prove, I think that I was colloquially meaning it, but if you think, I totally understand, I'm okay with pedantry. But yeah, just this idea of scientific consensus being conflated with science, because science is what should ultimately, drive that consensus, and it should be open to, shifting if new evidence becomes available, but not until then. And also, a hypothesis is not a conspiracy fringe theory. That if people are ignoring evidence and they are trying to explain away why their explanation isn't working out, that's no longer a hypothesis. That's a fringe conspiracy theory, and it does not belong in the same category.
Yeah.
Anyway.